The bell rang, echoing through the halls of Westbrook High as students hurried to their next classes. Darnell walked with purpose, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes set on a distant goal that seemed to move further away with each passing day. At 17, he carried more than just textbooks. He carried the weight of expectations, doubt, and a burning desire to rise above it all. Despite the challenges he faced, Darnell excelled in his studies, driven by his dream of becoming an engineer. He spent countless late nights buried in equations and diagrams, his mind racing with possibilities for the future. But no matter how hard he worked, there was always one roadblock he couldn't seem to overcome. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, the school's history teacher, had a reputation for being strict, but Darnell knew there was more to it. In class, Mr. Thompson never missed a chance to undermine him. Whenever Darnell raised his hand to answer a question, the teacher would offer a skeptical glance, as if doubting his intelligence. "Interesting guess, Darnell," he would say with a smirk, before calling on another student to validate the answer. His comments were always laced with an edge, subtle enough to avoid outright confrontation, but sharp enough to cut deep. "History requires a certain kind of thinker," Mr. Thompson had once remarked to the class after Darnell presented a well-researched project. "Some people just aren't suited for it." The words lingered long after the class ended, gnawing at Darnell's confidence like termites in wood. But it was the day he received his essay back that pushed him to his breaking point. He had spent hours writing it, meticulously researching, crafting every argument with precision and passion. He had even asked his English teacher for feedback before submitting it, but when the paper landed on his desk, the only thing that stood out was the glaring red AF across the top. Darnell's throat tightened as Mr. Thompson walked by, pausing just long enough to lean in and whisper, "Looks like you just can't keep up." The classroom buzzed around him, but Darnell couldn't hear anything past the ringing in his ears. His fingers curled into fists, the paper crumpling beneath his grip. Anger surged through him, but he knew better than to show it. He had learned long ago that raising his voice wouldn't change anything. It would only confirm what people like Mr. Thompson already believed. Instead, he took a deep breath and made a silent promise. He wasn't going to argue or plead his case. He was going to prove them all wrong in a way they'd never forget. Later that day, Darnell sat alone in the school library, staring at the failed essay. He carefully smoothed it out on the table, tracing over the harsh red lines and dismissive comments. A wave of frustration washed over him, but beneath it was something stronger: determination. He knew the quality of his work, and he wasn't going to let Mr. Thompson's bias define his potential. With renewed focus, he opened his laptop and began researching ways to challenge the grade fairly. He pored through the student handbook, noting policies on academic disputes and grading fairness. As he read, a plan started to take shape in his mind, one that required patience, effort, and an undeniable display of his capabilities. Over the next few weeks, Darnell put everything he had into his studies. He sought help from teachers he trusted, refining his essays and studying historical perspectives with a newfound intensity. His peers noticed the change, some offering words of encouragement while others remained indifferent. But Darnell didn't care. He wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for himself. He also joined an after-school academic club where he found mentors who recognized his potential and offered guidance. One of them, Ms. Carter, an influential history teacher from another school, took a special interest in his work. She encouraged him to submit his essays to local competitions and helped him sharpen his analytical skills. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued to undermine him at every opportunity, but Darnell remained steadfast. He answered every question in class with confidence, submitted assignments early, and refused to give Mr. Thompson any excuse to dismiss his efforts. He was determined to make his excellence undeniable. The turning point came when Darnell's revised essay, reviewed by Ms. Carter, won first place in a statewide competition. The school principal took notice, and soon the entire faculty was buzzing about his achievement. It was an undeniable validation of his intelligence and hard work, something even Mr. Thompson couldn't ignore. The day his award was announced at the school assembly, Darnell stood tall as applause filled the auditorium. Mr. Thompson, standing in the back, shifted uncomfortably, his face a mix of surprise and reluctant acknowledgement. After the assembly, as Darnell walked past him, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "I suppose I underestimated you," he said, avoiding eye contact. Darnell simply smiled, his voice calm but resolute. "I didn't." In that moment, he realized that proving people wrong wasn't about seeking their approval. It was about proving something to himself. And he had done just that. The red AFF on his essay wasn't just a grade. It was a statement, a challenge, a test of everything Darnell had worked so hard for. The sting of Mr. Thompson's words echoed in his head. But what hurt more was the reaction from his classmates. Some whispered behind his back, their voices hushed but sharp enough to cut through the crowded hallways. "Guess he's not as smart as he thought," someone murmured near his locker. Others offered sympathetic smiles and awkward pats on the back, their eyes filled with pity. His best friend Marcus wasn't as subtle. He slammed his locker shut with a loud clang and turned to Darnell with fire in his eyes. "Man, you can't let him get away with this. You know you deserve better." Darnell shook his head, his grip tightening on the crumpled essay in his hand. "Let them think they've won," he said, his voice steady, though anger simmered beneath the surface. "I'm not going to fight their way. I'm going to fight smarter." Marcus sighed, clearly frustrated but knowing better than to push his friend further. "All right, man. Just don't let him walk all over you." But Darnell already had a plan in motion. He knew the system wasn't designed in his favor, but that didn't mean he couldn't beat it on his own terms. He spent hours in the school library, his fingers flipping through history textbooks, scribbling notes furiously, and absorbing every detail with precision. He wasn't just studying for tests, he was studying for battle. Late nights turned into early mornings as he researched, compiled evidence, and built his case. He dug out past essays, carefully reviewed the comments left by other teachers who had praised his work, and gathered graded assignments that reflected his consistent performance. With each passing day, his determination grew stronger. He also sought out help, reaching beyond Mr. Thompson's narrow view. He approached Ms. Ramirez, the English teacher who had always believed in his potential. She provided feedback, helping him refine his writing style and organize his arguments more effectively. "You have something to prove, Darnell," she said with a knowing smile. "Let your work speak for itself." Online, he watched lectures from renowned historians, broadening his understanding beyond the classroom. He immersed himself in historical documentaries, piecing together different perspectives and approaches that Mr. Thompson never acknowledged in his narrow teachings. Meanwhile, in class, Mr. Thompson continued his usual condescending remarks. "Surprised you're still in this class, Darnell," he said one afternoon after a particularly difficult quiz. "But hey, maybe today's the day you catch up." Darnell, rather than taking the bait, simply smiled and turned in his paper early. When the grades were posted, he had earned a perfect score. Mr. Thompson's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of irritation crossed his features. It didn't go unnoticed. Slowly but surely, his classmates started to take notice of Darnell's quiet resilience. They watched as he answered complex questions with ease, as he completed assignments with confidence, and as he aced pop quizzes that left others struggling. "He's on another level," one student whispered to Marcus during class. Darnell didn't just excel, he made it look effortless. He wasn't just proving a point, he was rewriting the narrative that Mr. Thompson had tried to impose on him. His success didn't just stay in the classroom. Word spread beyond the history department, and other teachers began recognizing Darnell's dedication. The principal himself approached him in the hallway one morning. "I've been hearing good things about you, Darnell," he said with a nod of approval. "Keep it up." Despite the progress he was making, Darnell knew that true validation wouldn't come until he faced Mr. Thompson directly. He needed to show, undeniably, that his abilities went beyond what the teacher was willing to see. Finally, the opportunity arrived. The school was holding its annual academic competition, and students were encouraged to submit essays on historical topics of their choice. Darnell knew this was his chance to make a statement no one could ignore. He poured his heart into the competition essay, weaving together facts and analysis with the skill of a true scholar. When he handed it in, there was no hesitation in his step, no doubt in his mind. He had done the work, and now it was time for the results to speak for themselves. The day the winners were announced, the school gathered in the auditorium. Darnell stood among his peers, his heart pounding in his chest. When his name was called as the first-place winner, a wave of applause erupted. He caught Mr. Thompson's expression from across the room, a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. For the first time, the teacher had nothing to say. As Darnell walked onto the stage to receive his award, Marcus clapped him on the back. "Told you, man. You didn't just prove them wrong. You made sure they'd never doubt you again." Darnell smiled, gripping the trophy in his hand. He had played smarter, worked harder, and in the end he hadn't just kept up. He had soared past every expectation. The statewide history competition was something Darnell had always dreamed of entering. But every time he brought it up in class, Mr. Thompson had a reason to deny him. "It's a rigorous event," the teacher would say, his voice laced with condescension. "You wouldn't want to set yourself up for disappointment." But this time was different. With unwavering determination and a newfound sense of self-belief, Darnell approached the principal directly. To his surprise, the principal, having noticed Darnell's relentless work and the growing support from other teachers, gave him the green light. Mr. Thompson protested, of course, trying to convince the principal that Darnell wasn't competition material, but his objections were overruled. When the news spread that Darnell would be representing Westbrook High in the statewide competition, it sent ripples through the school. Some students were thrilled, excited to see Darnell finally get the chance he deserved. Others, like Mr. Thompson's usual favorites, sneered and whispered about how he would humiliate himself. Marcus, however, stood proudly by Darnell's side. "Man, you're about to show them what you've got," he said, clapping him on the back. On the day of the competition, the atmosphere in the grand auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Schools from across the state had gathered, their brightest students sitting stiffly in their chairs, waiting for the first round to begin. Darnell walked in with his head held high, his heart pounding but his mind sharp. Mr. Thompson, sitting among the faculty, leaned back with a smug smile, arms crossed, certain that Darnell's performance would justify all his previous doubts. The competition began with rapid-fire questions on American history. As the moderator announced each question, hands shot up around the room. But Darnell was always a step ahead. With a calm and confident voice, he cited facts with precision, effortlessly weaving together historical narratives and key dates. "What was the primary cause of the 1929 stock market crash?" the moderator asked. Darnell pressed his buzzer before anyone else. "A combination of speculation, lack of regulation, and overextension of credit contributed to the economic collapse, leading to the Great Depression." The judges exchanged impressed glances, and Mr. Thompson's smirk faltered slightly. As the competition progressed, Darnell continued to shine. While other students stuck to textbook answers, he went further, drawing connections between past events and modern social issues, demonstrating an understanding far beyond what was expected. When asked about the civil rights movement, he didn't just recite facts. He drew parallels to current struggles for racial equality and policy reforms, leaving the audience in awe. Back at Westbrook High, students watching the live stream began to cheer. Even teachers who had once dismissed Darnell's potential found themselves nodding in admiration. Marcus, glued to his phone in the crowded cafeteria, pumped his fist. "That's my boy!" he shouted, drawing laughter and applause from the students around him. By the time the final round approached, Darnell was leading with an almost unbeatable score. The final question arrived, an open-ended analysis of historical leadership styles and their impact on modern governance. Darnell took a deep breath and delivered a response that left the room in stunned silence. He spoke about the importance of inclusive leadership, weaving in historical examples and his own reflections on personal resilience and perseverance. His words carried weight, not just because of their accuracy, but because they were spoken with passion and authenticity. When the competition ended, there was a moment of tense anticipation before the results were announced. And then it came: Darnell Daniels, first place. The auditorium erupted into applause, and Westbrook High students cheered wildly, their pride echoing through the school halls. Darnell had not only won, he had set a new record score for the school. Mr. Thompson sat frozen in his seat, his usual smugness replaced with sheer disbelief. He had underestimated Darnell, and now the entire school, no, the entire state, had seen what he was capable of. As Darnell walked off the stage with his trophy, he met Mr. Thompson's stunned gaze head-on. He didn't say a word, but the triumph in his eyes spoke volumes. Back at school the next day, the entire campus was abuzz with congratulations. Teachers, students, even the principal himself stopped Darnell in the hallways to commend him. Mr. Thompson, forced to acknowledge his victory, muttered an awkward "Good work, Daniels," before scurrying away. Marcus grinned as he nudged Darnell. "You did it, man. You didn't just prove them wrong. You made history." Darnell smiled, the weight of all his struggles finally feeling worth it. "I told you," he said with quiet confidence. "I was never trying to prove anything to them. I was proving it to myself." And from that day forward, Darnell walked through the halls of Westbrook High, not just as a student, but as an inspiration. Proof that perseverance, intelligence, and unwavering belief in oneself could overcome even the toughest obstacles. The next morning, as Darnell walked through the halls of Westbrook High, everything felt different. The same corridors where whispers of doubt once followed him were now filled with murmurs of admiration. Students who had once ignored or doubted him now greeted him with nods of respect, some even stopping to congratulate him personally. The once familiar weight of skepticism had been replaced by something new: pride, confidence, and validation. His victory at the state history competition had made waves throughout the school. The Westbrook Gazette, the school newspaper, ran a full-page feature on him, headlined "Darnell Daniels, Defying the Odds and Making History." The article detailed his journey, highlighting his resilience in the face of adversity and the quiet strength that had led him to triumph. It wasn't just about his academic achievement. It was about perseverance, determination, and proving that hard work could overcome even the deepest biases. In the cafeteria, students gathered around him, eager to hear his story firsthand. Even those who had once whispered behind his back now spoke with admiration. Marcus grinned proudly at his friend, nudging him as they passed a group of underclassmen, whispering in awe. "Man, look at you. You're like a celebrity now," Marcus teased. Darnell chuckled but shook his head. "It's not about being a celebrity. It's about showing people they can rise above anything." However, not everyone was celebrating. Mr. Thompson, who had once dismissed Darnell so easily, now found himself under an unwelcome spotlight. Parents and faculty members began raising questions about his teaching methods, and the principal had received more than a few complaints. Rumors swirled through the faculty lounge that he had been called in for a meeting of concern regarding his grading practices. Later that day, Darnell was called into the principal's office. Principal Roberts, who had always kept a neutral stance, now looked at him with a mixture of respect and regret. "Darnell," he began, folding his hands on the desk, "I want to personally congratulate you on your victory. Your hard work and dedication have not gone unnoticed." Darnell nodded politely, waiting for what was coming next. The principal sighed, adjusting his glasses. "I also want to apologize. It's clear now that some things were overlooked, and I assure you, all of your past work will be re-evaluated. We'll ensure fairness moving forward." For a moment, Darnell felt a rush of vindication. He had waited a long time to hear those words, but instead of dwelling on the past, he saw an opportunity for the future. "Thank you, sir," Darnell replied. "But I have a request." Principal Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want to start a tutoring program," Darnell said, his voice steady and confident. "There are other students like me, students who work hard but feel like they're being overlooked. I want to help them, show them that they can succeed too." The principal leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. That's an incredible idea, Darnell. I think it could do a lot of good for our school. Consider it approved. Darnell smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal victory. This was about more than just proving Mr. Thompson wrong. It was about lifting others up, ensuring that no one else had to feel the way he once did. In the weeks that followed, Darnell's tutoring program took shape. Students who had struggled academically began attending sessions after school, finding encouragement and support in Darnell's guidance. He shared his strategies, his late-night study habits, and most importantly, his belief that success was possible for everyone, regardless of the obstacles in their way. And though Mr. Thompson remained distant, quieter in class, and more careful with his words, Darnell didn't need his approval anymore. He had found something greater: the respect of his peers, the acknowledgement of his teachers, and most importantly, the knowledge that he had turned his struggle into something meaningful. As he walked through the school each day, he no longer felt like he had to prove himself to anyone. He had done that, and more. He had inspired a change, not just in how others saw him, but in how they saw themselves. And as he looked toward his future, Darnell knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. Weeks passed, and the changes at Westbrook High were evident. Mr. Thompson, once an untouchable figure in the history department, was quietly transferred to another school after the growing scrutiny over his grading methods and treatment of students. His departure left a noticeable shift in the school's atmosphere, and for the first time, students felt like their hard work would be valued without bias. In his place, the school hired Ms. Callahan, a progressive and passionate educator who believed in fairness, effort, and the power of encouragement. Under Ms. Callahan's guidance, Darnell continued to flourish. He no longer walked the halls with the weight of proving himself. He walked with purpose, knowing he had already done so. His grades reflected his brilliance, and his tutoring program became a staple at Westbrook High, helping struggling students realize their potential. Teachers who once dismissed him now spoke his name with admiration, and students who had once doubted him now sought his advice and inspiration. With his newfound confidence and growing reputation, opportunities began pouring in. Darnell received multiple scholarship offers from prestigious universities, recognizing both his academic excellence and his leadership qualities. He was invited to participate in leadership programs aimed at young innovators, where he met other students who had overcome adversity and were determined to make a difference in the world. Despite the accolades, Darnell remained grounded. Every morning he still arrived early to help his peers, staying late to work on his own dreams of becoming an engineer. He had learned that true success wasn't about recognition. It was about persistence, resilience, and lifting others up along the way. As graduation day approached, excitement buzzed through the halls. The auditorium was filled with proud parents, students dressed in their caps and gowns, and faculty members eager to celebrate the achievements of the graduating class. Darnell, standing at the front of the line, adjusted his sash, the gold tassel on his cap glinting under the lights. When his name was called, the entire room erupted into applause. Marcus gave him a loud cheer from the back, and Ms. Callahan beamed with pride. But one face in the crowd stood out: Mr. Thompson. He stood quietly at the back of the room, his expression unreadable, but his presence undeniable. Darnell felt a flicker of surprise, but quickly refocused. This moment wasn't about the past. It was about how far he had come. Taking the podium, Darnell looked out over the crowd. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice was steady and strong. "Success isn't given, it's earned," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his classmates and teachers. "And sometimes, the biggest obstacles turn into our greatest motivation." A hushed silence fell over the room as Darnell continued, his words carrying weight and meaning. He spoke about resilience, about believing in oneself even when others don't, and about the importance of hard work and integrity. He shared his journey, not as a tale of struggle, but as one of perseverance and triumph. "As we step into the next chapter of our lives," he concluded, "let's remember that challenges don't define us. Our response to them does. We are stronger, wiser, and more capable than we've ever imagined. And we owe it to ourselves to keep pushing forward. The auditorium burst into a standing ovation, cheers and applause echoing through the hall. Darnell smiled, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. As he stepped down from the stage, he caught sight of Mr. Thompson. The older man gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that needed no words. Humbled and perhaps even regretful, Mr. Thompson had no choice but to recognize the young man he had once underestimated. Later, as Darnell celebrated with friends and family, he reflected on everything that had brought him to this moment. The struggles, the setbacks, and the doubt had all been stepping stones to something greater. He had not only proven himself, but had set an example that others could follow. He had shown that perseverance could break down barriers, and that success, when earned through hard work and integrity, was the sweetest victory of all. As the sun set over Westbrook High, Darnell stood by the school gates one last time, his diploma in hand, and smiled. He wasn't just walking away with an education. He was walking away with a legacy. And deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning. The world was waiting, and he was ready to meet it head on.